Hey, welcome back to Allison Customs Project Car TV. We're back on to Dustin's Mustang, and in the last few days I've gotten last 2 days, I've gotten this other passenger side floor pan, the transition to the firewall, welded in, ground down, primed over my welds, and we are ready to set the floor in. So the way this floor came out, it overlapped this front transmission hump and the transitions up to the firewall, but it also overlapped the rear floor section. So what we really need to do is get it in here, kind of lift it up out of the way as much as we can, and then just let it sit there. All we're doing is kind of pre-positioning it, and as part of that, because we're not going to be able to take it back out unless we take all this cross bracing out. So as part of that, we need to make sure we have all of our holes drilled or punched in it so that it can be welded in once it's set in place for the final time. But for now, we're basically just going to get it in here, pre-position it, and then lift it up as high as we can, get it out as much out of the way as possible until we get the rear section installed, and the rear section will go in with the wheel wells and the quarter panels shortly thereafter, that kind of stuff. So we are doing a one-piece floor for the main cabin section. They do, I believe, make full one-piece from right here all the way through the trunk of the car. We couldn't get one of those. We were ordering this stuff last year and they just weren't available. But we were able to get it, basically the full floor up here and then the full trunk section. So that's the way we're going to put it together, and I'll spin you around and show you the piece. Alright, so what we've got is a full floor from the transition area and the tunnel, transmission tunnel, all the way back to what would be below the back seats. It does not have any of the cross braces on, so if you needed any of those or the boxes for the seats, the seat risers, you'd need to either order those or save them out of your other car. On a Mustang is a unibody car, so there is no frame under it, and the rocker panels are your main supports for the body. So then, floor, it's a Dynacorn piece. It's silver because it comes to us in weld-through primer. We have some Mike Myers subframe connectors that these do weld in, and even though they're powder coated, we just grind off as much of the powder coat as we need to, and then these holes are so we can weld through them for like a rosette weld, plug weld. And it mounts to the front cross member or front subframe, and then the rear subframe, and then tucks all the way up onto this rear cross or rear frame rails, and they'll actually catch back here where these turn up. Now those are the two rear frame rails, and then these are the top of the torque boxes here, brand new. Now the reason this frame rail is black and that frame rail is silver is because we could not get the passenger side frame rail in a weld-through primer. It just wasn't available at the time we were ordering all this. But no big deal, we'll grind off what we need to, spray it with some weld-through primer, and then clean it up in the areas that we need to when we're welding through it with the floor. So, like I said, basically the next step is to get this floor in place. Really what I need to do is go ahead and get the old torque boxes out of the rear, put a few identifying marks where things line up, and then I can go back in, put this floor in place, put these rear cross members in place, or rear frame rails in place rather, and then I can come back, put the torque boxes together, and then start getting it ready to put the floor of the trunk in. Okay, so this is the torque box, and there's another one right over there. Those are the ones I was saying that we worked fairly hard to salvage, because there's really nothing wrong with the metal, but this inside part is already attached to the frame rail, so we would have to cut all that loose, or we can cut about probably 8 or 10 welds here, spot welds, and both of these will just come off, and then we can put all new metal in. But we'll mark a few marks here so we know, hey, the original ended here and ended here, and we can basically get the new ones back in the same location. Not having these in here will also make getting this front part of this floor in place quite a bit simpler. So I'm going to get a drill and a couple spot weld drills, and I'm going to go ahead and drill out these spot welds that we left behind. And alright, well, as you can see, it takes a little doing for one person to put, you know, this floor in. It's not very heavy, it's just very awkward. I've got it forward, based on where these are at and the actual holes for the seat belts. It's forward about 1 inch, and I've got it about 1 inch, maybe a little more than that, higher than it needs to be, at least in the middle. The sides are, you know, drooping down, but what that did is let me go ahead and get the frame rails in. And I think when we were talking about them earlier, well, I know we were talking about them earlier, I had them swapped sides, so it's the driver's side that's black. But these posts that I have in here are what represent, there's this post and this one on this side, and I've got this one lowered right now, but I made a mark when we had the whole car together. But it's in the right distance out, it just is lower than it needs to be. But that will let this come up to the proper height, somewhere right around there. And that lets me get these in the correct locations across the whole car. So that'll set the front frame rail in place. Then I can just clamp it to the inner rocker panel. I do need to take them back off, punch some holes in them just like I did the floor, but we've got the floor now all set up for rosette welds. And so that expanding gauge I use is actually designed for the aircraft, the experimental aircraft, home-built aircraft industry, and it's so they can space out their rivets in a nice pattern. So, but it works great for using a marker through it and then putting your weld holes in a nice even pattern across. So that one goes to 1 7/8 inches is the max it'll split them. So I just did that. 2 inches was what I was going for. So anyway, so that's all done. It has taken me hour upon hour of measuring and adjusting and measuring and adjusting to get all of these posts exactly correct. There had been at least one rear end collision with this vehicle. So when I put these uprights into place for the, you know, to get everything lined up, it wasn't quite right. And it wasn't quite right by, I think it was that corner was off by over 3/4 of an inch, and it took a lot of just finagling to kind of get it all into place and get all the dimensions to show up for the factory dimensions. And the factory dimensions are plus or minus 1/16 of an inch on any dimension under 100 inches, and then plus or minus 1/8 of an inch for anything over 100 inches. We're there now. It just took a lot of measuring and a lot of adjusting, and ended up re-leveling the whole framework. I just couldn't get things to work out right, so I ended up re-leveling the whole framework for the jig, and it wasn't off by very much, but it was off just enough to make me need to make some adjustments. And once I had that, then I went back in, got my datum line established, and I only have like 3 points at the front of the car that I can establish that datum from, because the whole back half of the car was A, gone, and B, that side was bent all the heck. Well, as it turns out, which makes sense, when you get in a rear end collision, it doesn't just do damage to one little, isolated location. It kind of shifts everything. Well, it had shifted not only that frame rail and bent it, but it had shifted this frame rail out of position, mostly coming towards the outside. But it was throwing the dimensions off. So it took a while, like roughly 5 hours of just measuring and adjusting, But it's there now. In fact, I've already gone in and welded in that frame rail just a couple minutes ago, and this one is ready to come back out. Basically, I've got the floor just sitting in there. It's really tight to get everything in and out, but you kind of just jack up the floor, then you can lift this out, drill rosette welds or plug weld holes in all of the flanges, and then set it back in place, and everything just drops right back onto the pins. So happy with what I got, happy with where it's at. So we'll get that done. Like I said, that one's welded in, so we'll weld in this one next, and then we can come back, start working on the trunk floor, getting everything up underneath the regular main floor, and just basically building it out. I am working on getting this floor, the trunk floor in, and the cross member that goes up here. So this beastie unit right here. So that goes in at an angle up here. And unfortunately, even though on some of these parts they put the factory alignment holes and stuff in them so that you can line stuff up, the cross member has the factory alignment holes. The frame rails do not. So no big deal. All we got to do is put the floor in place, and then this pretty much only fits in one area under the floor. So I've got the floor in. I had it clamped down. It's just sitting here now. And then once with that done, I took a marker and marked the bottom side where the frame rails are, so we can drill some holes in the floor pan so I can weld it down to the frame rails. I also went ahead and marked where this cross member goes, both across the floor pan, so I can drill some more holes for welding, as well as on the frame rails themselves. It's pretty simple. It's basic. It's just the shock mounts. I say just, you want it welded in really well, but it's not absolutely got to be within a 1/16 of an inch for any real purpose. Everything else is in place, measured out. The numbers came out within, I don't know, about a 32nd of an inch to get everything squared up. The floor laid right in, so I know, once you do one piece and you do the next, you've got it. So just got to lift the floor back out and put these in. Now to get this trunk floor in, some of you that are sharp-eyed will notice that this piece is missing on both sides. I was going to either have to take out the whole piece, which is drill out about 15-20 welds spot welds on each side, or just cut it off. I can weld it back in. The thing is, we're doing a mini tub on this, so we're going to be trimming some of this floor away, and we're going to be trimming part of this upright away as well. So the amount that I'm going to have to weld back in might only be 3 or 4 inches. So either way, it was going to be modified. So it just seemed easier to cut them off, get myself all the clearance that I need without having to move my hinge plates and stuff for the trunk, because I have a jig built off of these for other parts, so kind of want those to stay in place. With those cut off, that let me get the floor in. I'm now just going to take it back out, go ahead and get holes drilled in this cross member and get it welded in across here, and then I can come back, put the floor back in after I drill all the holes in it as well. And there's going to be a bunch of them to get both sides of the frame rail on both frame rails, and then down through the center for that cross member, So got a bunch of holes to drill there. Got about 2, 4, 6, about 12, maybe 14 holes to drill for the cross member to get it in place. You see here our frame rails, cross member, all that's been lined out. So now we're going to come in, set up a pattern and drill some holes so that we can weld it to the frame rails. And then one of the things I've been doing is, as I put there, I think I recommended before you could use like a cut-off drill bit. Just found that what's working best is it's just a 1/4 inch mill bit, but it works good because it cuts flat, so it takes off any paint in the hole. So I just drill a 1/4 inch hole, then use that to hit the paint on the side where I'm welding, and I get a good contact. That way I can keep everything else painted. So now we'll go ahead and lay out our patterns and drill the holes here. Okay, so the trunk floor is now in. I have left from about here forward on the outside of the frame rail. I've left just some Tech screws holding that all in place. I ended up welding up a few of the holes because I wasn't thinking. But I basically drilled about 100 holes in the floor so that I could weld through into the frame rails and into the cross member. And I've welded up everything in the cross member. I've welded up everything on the inside of the frame rails. And then I left, like I said, just to about here with this outer side of the frame rail, because we know we're going to put in a wheel tub here. And some of that is probably going to be coming out, so there's just no sense in welding and grinding down welds that are going to be cut away anyway. and then any that are left I'll go back and weld after. I used about, well, if I drilled 100 holes, and that's just an estimate, then about every other hole or every third one, if it was a nice long stretch where everything was nice and tight, I would put a Tech screw through the panel and through the frame rail to hold it all down tight, because it's hard to get a lot of clamps on all of this, whereas you can use 50 Tech screws for $5 or $6. So I still have some Tech screws in this outside frame rail to hold it down, but everything else is welded up and ground down. Once I have the rest of it done, then I'll get like a DA with some 180 grit or something and kind of sand the whole thing down just to smooth it all out so you don't have the 30 grit grinding marks in it. But for now, that part's done. So the next thing is I've got to call into the owner. He's the one who sent me the wheel tubs we're going to be using. And they're a mini tub. They're not real wide, less than about 6 inches there. But you got to go in here and square things off. And so I'm hoping that whoever made these has a pattern or something that I can lay out, or some measurements that I can lay out to know where to cut all this. Because it comes with the wheel tub, which is, it's nice. It's been bead rolled, and then the top part has been TIG welded onto it and ground down. They did a nice job. They're a good looking part. And then they sent some straps, which I believe are to go on top of the floor here and give you a place to weld down to the floor, and also weld the side of the wheel tub to it here on the vertical. So, again, ideally what we'll want to do is get this all cut out, maybe slide that under the floor, between the floor and the frame rail, just to give a little cleaner finished look. So let's see about that. And then they sent, there's two, one for each side. They sent another piece of just straight L the same way, which I assume is supposed to be used for the back, and then maybe up here at the front. So again, I'm just hoping that whoever made these has, even as simple as a video showing how they're installed, but giving us a measurement of where to cut and how much to cut towards the frame rail. I assume the bump stops need to come off, so obviously that now is the time to do that, versus when it's all, the quarter panel and everything is here and we're trying to get in there and drill them. So we'll just wait to hear back from him and get started on that. I think in the meantime I can probably go ahead and put my rear taillight panel in place. I'm going to hold off on the floor just yet because of the wheel tubs, and I want to make sure when I slide the floor back I've already notched it to fit the wheel tub correctly.